What's up, folks? How's it going? We're going to do a video response today. I already did this video once, but it was much too long. Get out of here. So this question was sent to me. You're a history buff. What do you make of this? Is this guy onto something, or is he full of shit? The video that was sent to me was a video by a gentleman by the name of Steph Bott. And the video is called The Myth of World Wars. It's an old video from 2007, but it's so astonishingly full of shit that it must be commented on, no matter how old it is. I've heard this dude's name before. I don't know what his deal is. I don't know what he does. This is the first video of his that I've seen. But some of you might know who this Steph Bott person is. So it's a long video. It's 41 minutes long. I'm going to try my best to make my response short-ish. Not shortish, but shorter than the first time I did it. I've written down some notes here. His video goes back and forth a lot, and it's convoluted. So the lack of direction is not my fault. Alright, so the video is called Myths of World Wars, and the thesis, it was hard to piece this together because of the fucked up way that he explains everything, but the way I gather it, his thesis is that the world wars were unnecessary, though he never explains how he would have avoided them. Not only were they unnecessary, but we are less free in the aftermath of these wars than we were before, is the statement. Alright, so that's the gist of what's going on in this video, to give you some context here. You feel free to watch it before this, but I wouldn't fucking bother. It's unnecessary. The first thing he says is that the Second World War, he says in order to understand the Second World War, you have to understand the First World War, and yes, that's absolutely true. But he proves right out of the gate that he doesn't understand anything about either of them, because he starts by saying that the Second World War is just a repeat of the First World War, like it's just the same war started again. And this is untrue, okay? While the causes are related, okay, the wars are closely related, all right? There may not have been a World War II without a World War I. At least it wouldn't have been the same thing. But the two wars had completely different motivations behind them, and that's key here, okay? The First World War, why does the First World War happen? The First World War happens because of these entangling alliances. Moves were made, counter moves were made, and they said, shit, if we are bound contractually to get involved in these wars anyway, we might as well get something out of it. Hence the German invasions of France, and so on and so forth. The purpose behind the Second World War was always from the beginning conquest, retribution, and genocide. The Holocaust was a key aspect and goal of the German war, okay? The German war aims, that was one of the key goals. It's important not to forget that. All right. Now, this is when he starts veering into bullshit, and he will continue to plow through the bullshit like a bullshit plow for the rest of the video. Well, that was terrible, but whatever. You get the idea. A man with a plow on him, moving through feces. He says the public schools, the reason that the World War I was so bad was that public schools made people more willing to fight for the state. How so? First of all, what public schools? Not everybody was going to public schools. Most people in 1914 had little to no education at all. Okay, so I don't know what the fuck he's talking about. But it doesn't make people, it's not as if people were unwilling to fight before. People have been fighting through all of time. Okay, war is an inseparable part of the human condition. All right. Now keep this in mind. I forgot to mention this, but this is very important in understanding the failure that is this video. This man claims to have a master's degree in history from a university in Canada. I can't remember what university he said, but he said it was one of the Ivy League universities of Canada. Okay. So a master's degree in history. But with that master's degree, apparently they didn't teach him anything that occurred before 1914, because believe it or not, people were they'd been fighting wars for all of time. Okay, public schools was not the match that they needed to light that fire of war. that's absolutely ridiculous. The reason the First World War was so devastating was because we have advanced technology with outdated tactics and methodology is why we have an extremely destructive war. Okay, mass production on an untold level is able to arm the individual soldier with way more destructive power than he's ever had in the history of mankind. If you watch my video about World War I, you can see more about that. So yeah, that was the reason it was more destructive, not because of the public schools. He says, you have people suddenly ready to kill and die for the state. No, what do you mean suddenly ready? People have been dying and killing for the state since the state has existed, since states were invented. But a lot of these men were drafted. They weren't all volunteers, so it doesn't make any sense at all. He starts talking about the after effects of the First World War, and he has a strange opposing opinions on this. He starts by saying that really the territorial changes were no big deal after the First World War, that no territory of any importance was changed hand, and that's ridiculous. He says that the lines were not drawn with any significant advantage to any one side. What the fuck are you talking about? Countries disappeared, borders were completely redrawn. The Germans lost huge industrial areas in the Rhineland. They lost fucking areas in the east to the Poles, areas with up to 90% German-speaking population. Significant areas, important areas, strategic areas were lost by the Germans, and to a greater extent by the Austro-Hungarians, because they didn't exist anymore after that. So yeah, all right. Now we're going to bounce back to the beginning. Again, a lot of bouncing around in this video. This is an epic quote from our master's degree holder in history. He starts talking about, I'm not going to go into the causes of the First World War or the reasons that the United States got involved, but I think it was because of the Lusitania or something. I think it was because of the Lusitania or something. That is an A for effort sentence right there. Please show your source. This is a common misunderstanding. While the sinking of the Lusitania certainly had an impact on the public's view of the war, what people don't seem to understand is that the Lusitania was sunk in 1915. We didn't get involved in the war for another 2 years. The reason that we got involved in the war really had more to do with unrestricted German submarine warfare and their backroom deals with the Mexicans, trying to urge them to do cross-border raids and other various unpleasant things that we were not very happy about when we found out about that shit. So that's the reason that it happened. It wasn't because of the Lusitania or something. He keeps talking more about the state indoctrination and education of children, as if this is the reason for this. At a few points in this video, he flirts with the truth, but he just goes careening completely off the cliff and falls to his death. It's absolutely terrible. He goes on to talk about intervention and this strange double standard that I don't understand, because he says that the American intervention in Europe in World War I was the reason that they were able to put such harsh terms on the Germans. Okay, and it was because of those harsh terms that the Germans did what they did, which is partially true, but not entirely true. It was because of those harsh terms that the Germans did what they did. Therefore, it was American interventionist thought that caused the Second World War to happen. Did you see how that worked? You got to be quick. But then he goes on to complain that the British and the Americans didn't do something about Hitler sooner. So I don't understand the fucking double standard here. Okay. You have to understand that the reason we didn't get involved with Hitler sooner is because the vast majority of the population wanted nothing to do with it. Okay? And no matter how much propagandists on both sides of the political aisle would like you to believe that the government doesn't answer to the people, it, believe it or not, does. And sometimes the people are stupid and sometimes they're smart. Sometimes they want war and sometimes they don't. And when they all don't want war, they tend not to get war. And that's what was going on. People changed their tunes rather quickly when they started to see what Hitler was doing, and then instantly when the Japanese attacked. But the reason we didn't get involved is because the government was listening to the people. I mean, you seem to have a problem with government control of people's lives, but you don't seem to have a problem with the government getting involved in a war that the people don't want. I don't understand. He goes on to talk about the people who fought in World War I, claiming especially that the French soldiers that died in the First World War died for no reason. I think that that's a fucking astonishingly stupid statement to make. They did accomplish something. They kept the Germans from taking France. I don't know if you were aware of this, but there are these folks called Germans, and what they wanted to do was take all of the French people's stuff. And so the French didn't want that to happen, so they died. Don't cheapen their sacrifices. Many of their lives were wasted against technology in ways that was later turned out to be unnecessary, but the overall sacrifice was not without reason. Now he goes on to even more insanity. More insanity ensues. He goes on to say that after he's already said that we were bad for not intervening with Hitler before the war started, he says Hitler gave up on his plans to invade Britain, which is true. And he says that after that, we should have just let Hitler lose to Russia, because he would have lost to Russia anyway, and then that would have been that. First of all, Hitler did give up his invasion plans of England, but it didn't stop him from continuing to bomb British cities and attack British shipping and all that shit, and fight the British in Africa and so on and so forth. So it's not like the war was put on hold. That's ridiculous. And not to cheapen the role of the Russian soldier, but the Russians never would have been able to win their war with Hitler if it had not been for the massive amount of weapons and money and ammo and food and trains and trucks and all the other shit that we sent them that made it possible for them to hold off, to stop the Germans and eventually push them back. The Russians, without our help, never would have been able to do that, especially if we had given up the war altogether, because at this time we were still attacking the Germans, fucking with their supplies. All these things made possible these astonishing Russian victories. All right. Now he goes on to start to talk about reason. He starts to get to the meat of this video. He states that the goal of the war was to fight against socialism, and that because after the war, the United States and England, whatever, became more socialistic, this means that we have, on a certain level, lost the war altogether. The goal of the war was not to fight against socialism. First of all, National Socialism and socialism are not the same thing. We'll get to that later. But the goal of the war was not to fight against socialism. The goal of the war was to stop Hitler from invading everyone. See, what this dude would do is he would put all these guys with guns on a border with another country, and then he would send them across, and they would kill people and take their stuff. And most people don't like being killed and having their shit taken, so that's why we got involved. That's why the British got involved. That's why the French got involved. They had pacts to protect Poland, as they should have. So no, we didn't get involved in the war to stop socialism. We didn't even get involved in the war to stop Nazism. Of course, that was later used for propaganda purposes, but nobody was sitting up in the top levels of government saying that we're doing this war to stop Nazism. They're saying we're doing this war to stop them from bombing us. Okay, that was the reason. Even in the middle of the 30s, in the mid-30s, Churchill and several other Western leaders were still of the opinion that Hitler could be a potential buffer against the power of the Soviet Union. All right, so there was not a huge amount of animosity against the Nazis until the late 30s. But no, the goal of the war was to stop the Germans from invading everybody. Fascism is fueled by war. Fascism necessarily requires it. If you have fascism, you will have war. There's no way around that. And he flirts with the truth in acknowledging that Hitler stated his goals beforehand, but then he totally veers off and doesn't realize that they knew his goals. which was conquest. That was an immediate concern. Politics can wait for later. The actual control and ownership of the land is the most important thing. He starts equating National Socialism with socialism again and again, and he does this throughout the rest of the video. It's not the same thing, okay? Saying the two in the same sentence close together doesn't make it more true, okay? It's bullshit. It's the argumentative equivalent of stabbing yourself in the dick, all right? He says we're fighting against totalitarianism, but at the same time we're expanding our own governments, and he talks about healthcare and welfare and all this shit. We weren't fighting the Nazis because they had a welfare system. We weren't fighting the Nazis because they wanted national health care. Are you fucking kidding me? We were fighting the Nazis because they were bombing everybody. Your whole video is based off of an untrue assumption of the goals of the war. He says that the goals of the war were the elimination of fascism and socialism. That's, again, not true. You say these words in the same sentence as if that makes them the same thing. Then right in the middle of this, he says something that I thought was hilarious. He says that before the First World War, there were no such thing as passports. And if you just go to, I'll put a Wikipedia link in there, you can, in the underbar, you can see a picture of the Chinese passport from 1898, which I'm not real great with numbers, but I'm pretty sure that was before the First World War. He also says that before the First and Second World Wars, we could go anywhere, move anywhere, and that's, what the fuck are you talking about? No, you couldn't. It was not like free and open travel everywhere before these wars. That's ridiculous. He says, look how free we were before the war to how free we are now. This depends on what the fuck you mean by free. Are we less free in the sense, does the government have more powers than it did before then? Yeah. But we don't have to worry about some dumbass European war every 40 years like we did before this. We, at least in the Western world, I know this goes on elsewhere, but at least in the Western world, we don't have to worry about genocide. Okay? And these wars did the ultimate good, and especially should be in the eyes of a person that has the opinions that you seem to have, did the ultimate good of dispelling the idea of a totalitarian government from the minds of most people in the West. It turned people off of Nazism and turned people off of communism and the old imperial ways. And people don't have to live in fear of genocide and stupid shit like that. And this war also, like it or not, and the way that they teach people about war now is that war is always a bad thing, is always a symptom of some failing in society, and I would argue that war is a natural process. We're not the only creatures that do it. Other primates do it. Ants do it. War being defined as some sort of organized combat between groups of the same species or different species. We're not the only ones that do that. And war is, whether you like it or not, an extremely useful tool for pushing forward a stagnated group of people. I think that the First World War and Second World War were absolutely necessary. Maybe not the huge death toll, but the conflicts themselves were necessary to shake off the old imperial royalty way of doing things in Europe. And these are nuances of the conflict that just seems to go right over your head, bro. Are we more free or less free? Well, the people in Europe are certainly a hell of a lot freer than they would have been if Hitler had won that war. I can assure you of that. He goes on to say that militarism was caused by the massive printing of money. He never explains this, but it's weird to me because he talks about the Napoleonic Wars earlier in this video, and he doesn't seem to understand that the Napoleonic Wars are easily the third most destructive war, series of wars, conflicts in the history of Europe right after the First and Second World Wars, and it was not rapid inflation that caused these wars to happen. Okay, there is not ever one cause. Okay, be wary of people who give you one cause. All right. No, it wasn't because of the printing of money. Then he gets even deeper into his own asshole. This is a fact. We are about 5 to 10% as free as we were before. What the fuck are you talking about? What arbitrary system have you come up with to rate freedom? This is a fact. We are about 5 to 10% as free as we were before. He doesn't extrapolate. He doesn't explain. He just says it. This is a fact. We are 5 to 10% as free as we were before. Bullshit numbers like this are a sign of a bullshit person. Okay? A huge amount of these numbers are completely made up. Then he jumps to talking about the Civil War, and he says that before the Civil War, we could choose our own schools for our children. And he says it in this ominous voice. You can choose your school for your kid now, bro. It's called a private school, man. Yeah, you could choose a school for your kids back in the day, but only if you had the money to afford a private school. A lot of people don't have the money for that. You seem to have a huge problem with public schools. Is the public schooling system flawed? Yes. Does it need to be reformed? Fuck yes, it does. But the public school system is the only way that a huge number of disadvantaged people would ever have a chance of even learning to read. Most people in the 1860s didn't have any education at all, and the same is true for the vast majority of people in the First and Second World Wars even. Alright, so I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Where did you learn this shit? You said that. Then you go on to say that the stated reason for the war was to destroy the military-industrial complex, or to fight against the military-industrial complex. What the fuck are you talking about? No, it wasn't. The military-industrial complex was the reason that we won that war in the first place. If anything, the United States had a more advanced military-industrial complex than Germany did. The Germans weren't even running fucking all-night shifts until the last little bit of the war, man. They hadn't even upped production to 100%. You know, it wasn't to fight against the military-industrial complex. He goes on to talk about income tax, as if it has something to do with the world wars. I don't know why. This is the best. This is the end here. Epic quote. Counting national debt, we are 90% of the way towards fascism anyway. Something like 8 out of 10 of the platforms of the Communist Party have been enacted in the United States. This is all the same sentence. Counting national debt, we are 90% of the way towards fascism anyway. Something like 8 out of 10 of the platforms of the Communist Party have already been enacted in the United States. Did you see what he just did? He just said that we are 90% of the way towards fascism and 80% of the way towards communism. What the fuck are you talking about, dude? For real. Does this mean that you are 10% away from being completely full of shit? How can you put these two... How can you put this sentence together and not feel ashamed? You hold a degree? What the fuck political science class did you take that they didn't explain to you the difference and how it makes you look like a complete asshole to put fascism and communism together in the same sentence? That's something Glenn Beck does. You're supposed to be better than that if you have half of a mind. Fuck you. So, I don't know. I had to do that. I know there was a long response, but so much bullshit crammed into one video was astonishing. So I'll talk to you folks later.